Love under the scope.
Welcome back to Love Under the Scope. This is a podcast where we are going to explore all of the realities of being in a relationship with another person. It's not always perfect. It's not always rainbows and butterflies, although maybe we would like it to be that way. It's just not reality. We do have to deal with conflict and obstacles and challenges that come up when we're with another person romantically. That's not a bad thing. These challenges and these obstacles, they can help us to actually grow, not only as a couple, but as an individual. I love to dive deep into these topics that are sometimes not covered, especially on social media, where we are shown the best version of every relationship. Not even sure if a lot of those versions are real or what we're seeing is real. And so that's what I aim to do in the show, is to get into the real stuff that maybe you don't feel comfortable even talking about with your friends or your family. I want us to be able to talk about that here. I am a relationship coach. I also help people with self-love and working through negative limiting patterns that can keep us trapped in our own shit, is what I like to call it, our shit. I help people to work through that. And I do that because I am passionate about doing that for myself. I find it very interesting. Not only have I gone through a year-long training to be able to do this work with other people and myself, but I am also in a nearly 7-year-long relationship where I have experimented with a lot of the methods that I have been taught, and I have seen how they work and how it feels really good to face the shit that we maybe don't normally want to look at, and to actually work through it with your partner, assuming that your partner is loving and you guys have a mostly safe and secure relationship. Of course, nothing is perfect, but on this show, I do like to come at each topic with the understanding that you are in a loving relationship. There's mostly no abuse going on. Hopefully zero, but humans aren't perfect. And so no physical, emotional, sexual, mental abuse going on. So that's the way that I approach my topics. I have worked with clients, couples, and individuals on each of the topics that I have covered so far in this show. And I aim to do so in all of the upcoming topics. They will be things that I have explored not only on my own, but with clients. And so I've seen a lot of the dynamics and how you can actually work through a lot of this stuff. It doesn't have to be the end of your relationship. It doesn't mean that you're a bad person. There's nothing wrong with you. It just means that we should look at this stuff and talk about it. And can we bring some openness, some honesty into the relationship? I hope that you are able to do that with your partner, to have an open, honest conversation. In my experience, that is the best way to work through this stuff, is to actually be able to talk about it and to have that vulnerability built into your relationship. Yes, it takes time to get that, to grow your vulnerability. Maybe it's not something that you have right at the onset, but over time, we certainly can build our vulnerability with each other and therefore the trust. And that's what allows us to dive into the topics that I like to explore. I like to take on some taboo stuff. That being said, the topic today is very much taboo. We're going to talk about when you have a crush outside of your relationship. This is a topic that can be kind of tricky. There is a lot of shame. There is a lot of you're a bad person if you have a crush. What's wrong with you? How could you ever do that? I think as a society, we have this weird understanding that when you pair up with somebody, or especially when you get married, then it's just happily ever after. You never look at anyone else. You don't think anybody else is attractive. And you only have eyes for your partner. I don't know that there are people on this planet who never even look at someone else and think that they are attractive, at least, or have a fleeting sexual thought. Perhaps that is the case, but for the purposes of this episode, I'm going to assume that we are human beings. Human beings are multifaceted. We are not robots. We are not programmed to love only John. I am programmed for John, and I serve John, and vice versa, men and women. We're not AI, okay? So we have so many layers, so many experiences, so many things from our childhood that could be unresolved, belief systems. And so that creates all of these different layers, this complexity in being a human being. That's what separates us from a machine or a robot, is the complexity, the multitudes that we contain. It's actually quite beautiful. And I find it fascinating that we could potentially develop a crush. Developing a crush doesn't mean that we lose control and we give our power over to that crush. And I will speak on that later. But it is something that I think is worth exploring. So in today's episode, we are going to get into what is a crush. I will define for you my idea of what a crush even is. And I would say each person that is listening to this show, you should go in and decide what is a crush for you. Where is the line between having a crush and maybe emotional affairs? Or a full-blown physical affair. What does that mean to you? You are going to have to define that within the terms of your relationship. And I totally encourage you to do so. Don't just take my word for it. I will tell you from my experience with not only in my own relationship, but working with clients and hearing stories and all of these things that I've compiled in order to come to this conclusion. Something that I want to speak on is this idea that we could develop a crush even if we are in very loving, connected, safe relationships. I have seen this with my clients where they're happy. They love their partner. They don't want to leave them. They don't necessarily even need something to change drastically. But this crush comes up. Now, there obviously is the instance where we are developing a crush because something is majorly lacking in the relationship. That is a possibility too. I would like to approach the topic today with this idea that it can happen even when you are very happy, and it doesn't mean that you need to dissolve the relationship. It doesn't mean that you are a failure in your relationship. It just means that you probably need to do some self-reflection. And I will talk about how you can approach that self-reflection, some questions you can ask yourself that might help you to understand the origin of your crush. Most of the time, we don't develop a crush for no reason. We might look at somebody and go, oh, they're hot, or we go to the gym. Well, that person's attractive. That's not really what I'm talking about. I am talking about a crush where you do feel some sort of fixation. You do feel some sort of maybe attraction. And it's a feeling, okay? It's a feeling. We're not acting on it. We're not doing anything about it. Because we're not acting on it, can we use this crush as something that we can meditate on? What is going on here that I may need to address within myself and within the relationship as well? I will reiterate that for the purposes of this episode, I'm going to assume that you want to stay with your partner. If that's not the case for you, that's a whole other conversation. But for today, we're going to be approaching the topic as if you want to stay with your partner, you find that this is a great relationship for you, and you are simply wanting to work through the crush, maybe ask yourself some questions, like I said, and eventually come out on the other side in a way that could actually bring you closer to your partner, which is really cool. With that being said, let's jump into what exactly is a crush. Right off the bat, I want to tackle the fact that a crush is not an affair. A crush is not a situation where you are having either a physical or an emotional affair with somebody. Now, if you've never heard of the distinction between the two, A physical affair would be probably pretty obvious. You are having sex with somebody, you are kissing somebody, you are having a physical connection with somebody who is not your partner. No, I don't just mean you hugged somebody. I'm talking about a sexually charged physical connection with another person. An emotional affair would be that you are relying on someone who is not your partner for love, for support, for emotional fulfillment. And I might even put excessive flirting into this category. So if you've ever been out with your partner and let's say they start flirting with the waitress in a way that makes you uncomfortable, it's too much, they're laying it on thick. Even if they're not having an affair with that person where they're actually talking outside of your experience at the restaurant, I would still put that into some kind of emotional cheating. And obviously, that's something that you have to decide for yourself. What is the line that makes you uncomfortable as far as being flirtatious? Human beings, we can be flirtatious by nature, especially if we are the type that we are very alive, we're very outgoing, we love to laugh and play. That can be seen as flirtatious sometimes. And that's why I want to emphasize that this is a couple-to-couple situation. Every couple will have their definition of cheating and having an affair. Some couples allow having sex with other people, full on physical contact, physical sexual connection with other people. Some couples are okay with a little bit of flirting. There are couples that I've heard of that are okay with kissing, but not sex. And so this is very personal to the couple. I definitely think it's important to discuss with your partner to some extent what is okay and what is not okay. For some relationships, it might be obvious. Yeah, obviously, we're not having sex with other people. That might be the case for you. It might be the case that you actually do need to discuss whether you're going to have sex with other people. But for the most part, I do think for the average couple, it's going to be more of that gray area where a little bit of flirtatiousness is okay and fun. And then it crosses the line when this happens. I have had clients where the woman has said, oh yeah, when you gave that woman a compliment about her dress, that was fine. That was sweet. I did support that. But then when you told her that you also thought her hair looked beautiful and that she had great makeup, that's when it started to be uncomfortable for me. And I started to feel othered in that relationship or in that situation. So this is definitely worth talking about. And actually, I think it can reveal some really interesting conversation topics for you and your partner to get into and to get very specific. Like I said with that example, this woman was okay with one compliment, but when it turned into 3, that's when it started to get a little weird for her. She started to feel uncomfortable. So you could literally tell your partner that. When you told her once that she was beautiful, that was nice. When you told her 3 times, I started to feel a little less than. I started to feel like you weren't focused on me. That's a whole conversation to have. And of course, there is a little bit of self-reflection that we can do there. Why did I feel so othered? What was it about his or her behavior? Doesn't mean that they can keep doing it. And you certainly are allowed to have boundaries. That's what I mean by having this conversation. What kind of boundaries do you need to set in these kind of gray areas of either flirtation, connection with another person? What kind of boundaries do you need to set, specific boundaries, that would make sure that you are comfortable within that space that you have created by having the conversation? The other thing I like about having a conversation like that is that it gives you parameters for understanding what is crossing the line and actually going into cheating. Like I mentioned before, there are things that are obvious for certain couples. Well, for me, or anybody else, maybe having sex is cheating unless we have that specific dialogue. You can have sex with somebody, and even within that would be very specific boundaries. You can have sex with somebody, but not twice. Okay, so that's a whole other conversation. But when we define those parameters, then we can understand very clearly what would be lying to your partner, because that's ultimately what cheating and an affair is, in my opinion. It would be that you are lying to your partner about a connection that you have shared with somebody, whether it's ongoing or it happened once or twice. It doesn't really matter. The fact of the matter is you would be lying to your partner. And I will never condone lying. Lying doesn't get us anywhere in a relationship. It just keeps us shoving the shit down instead of actually addressing what's going on. I think something else that sets an affair or cheating apart from a crush is that cheating is usually a situation where two parties are actually involved with each other. So it's a reciprocated feeling that is shared by you and somebody outside of your relationship. Whether it's emotional or physical, that feeling, that exchange would be mutual between two people. So let's talk about what is a crush. If a crush isn't an affair, isn't cheating, isn't blatantly lying to your partner about a connection that you have with somebody, what exactly is a crush then? My definition of a crush would be an infatuation, a projection, or an idealization, what some people might even call limerence, that you have formed around somebody who is not your partner. That person could be somebody that you have interactions with. It could be somebody that you don't have any interactions with, that you simply observe maybe from a distance. Maybe you work somewhere that this person comes in as a customer and you share very brief interactions. Maybe you go to a yoga class and they happen to be there taking the class with you and you guys don't actually speak. So it could go again from that spectrum of you actually speak to them and you do have interactions. It could be a coworker, all the way to somebody that you simply see in passing. You never talk to them. You simply have formed an infatuation or a idealization around that person without knowing very much about them. The foundation of it is that we don't know this person. So in that way, a crush is kind of like a fantasy that we have created in our mind. It's not that we know this person very closely or deeply. In fact, I believe that's where a crush can get very dangerous. So if you are wanting to continue with your relationship, if you are wanting to stay with your partner and you have this crush where you're actually starting to interact more frequently, more deeply with this other person, that becomes an issue. And I would recommend cutting that off as much as possible. Whatever you can do to cut that situation off, I would recommend. I do think that you're still going to want to do some reflection. Why did you form this bond with this person? What are you lacking maybe in yourself? What are you lacking maybe in the relationship? Not necessarily because it's the fault of your partner not giving it to you, but what are you not fostering in your relationship that led to the actual forward movement of this crush? I would say as well that developing an actual relationship, let's say you were to leave your partner for this person you have a crush on. Now, in certain situations, that might be good for you. Maybe you were in an abusive relationship. Maybe you really weren't happy. Maybe you had nothing in common anymore. And so it's probably not the best way to go about a breakup, but in certain situations, maybe going and having a relationship with your crush would work out for you. Would say for the most part, though, when we develop a crush, we don't know that person. Going back to what I said, it's a fantasy. It's a projection. It's a projection of what we want this person to be, what we want this person to do for us. And so if we were to break off our current relationship and go off with this person, our problems are not going to be solved by this crush. That's not a thing that other people can do for us. Nobody can come in and you run away with them and suddenly all of your problems are solved. No, there's going to have to be some kind of self-reflection. There's going to be some kind of reckoning with what are you trying to attain from this person. I think it's also kind of unfair to this crush, this person that we expect them to solve our problems. And I'll get into that a little bit more later. But coming back to what a crush actually is, I do believe that in general, if you are dealing with a crush that you don't really interact with very much, more than maybe a few words, if they're a customer at your store and you're ringing up their shit and you say, "Oh, how's your day been?" And then they move along, or you just don't speak to them at all, that's going to be much easier to deal with. That's why you really want to have the self-restraint to not allow it to go anywhere. Assuming that you love your partner, you really want to be able to have that restraint and keep yourself at a distance, in my opinion, so that you can leave space for exploring what the hell is going on here. Why is this happening? And what are you going to need to move through it? Kind of like a meditation. When we don't have that space there, we get a little too wrapped up together, and then the feelings become a lot more confusing, a lot more entangled. So that's why I really think it's important that when we define a crush, I do think it is somebody who we are not close with. We are not having regular, deep, meaningful conversations with. And in fact, we probably don't know them. When I say know them too, I mean really know them. The way that you know your partner. A crush, you will never know them that way, as far as the way that I am defining it right here. Let's get into why we might develop a crush. I already touched on the fact that yes, if you have a crush, there might be something that is severely lacking in your relationship. Is there something going on with your communication, with your sexual connection, with your emotional fulfillment? Is there a lack of depth? Do you not share the same values that maybe you did at the start and you just don't anymore? Every couple will have their issues, and that's fine. That's not what I'm talking about here. We have issues with communication sometimes. We have issues with sexual connection. These things ebb and they flow, and that is totally fine. As long as you are sort of aware of what's going on, for the most part, I would say that you are not in this bucket that I am describing where there is a severe lack of something. If you feel that that is you, I would suggest working with a coach or a therapist in order to have that conversation with your partner in a way that could be constructive and actually allow you to continue the relationship without this massive obstacle getting in the way. Assuming that you are in the bucket of everything being mostly great in your relationship, this is why you might develop a crush. Like I said at the start of this episode, human beings are multifaceted. We have a lot going on in our brain, in our body, energetically, things that we are still carrying from our childhood that are unresolved, these wounds that have maybe not been healed yet. And subconsciously, we are wanting to resolve those wounds. We can do that with our partner, especially if we are going about that consciously. If we are actually working together with our partner, or maybe on our own with a coach or a therapist, in order to resolve these wounds from our childhood. And there will be some things at any given point that are still there, can be developed when we are projecting our unhealed shit that, again, we are subconsciously wanting to heal. We're projecting that onto someone else. We will see that person as somebody who might be able to solve our problem. Whether that's true or not, I believe it's usually not true. We will create this fantasy, this image of this person in our mind that coincides with the idea that they could potentially help us heal. They could do or say or be something that helps us to heal from a very deep-seated wound. So we will see this person who we do not know as we want to see them, like a fantasy. They become a fantasy in our mind of somebody who could heal us. This is what ultimately will create some charge and some difficulty, frustration around the crush. We become latched onto it because it's coming from a very deep part of us, a part of us that we may not understand. And if we don't understand that part of us, that would add a layer of shame. Oh my God, why do I feel this way? Why can't I control this? Why can't I stop this? Well, because you've formed this fantasy and this projection based on something that is very, very deep inside you. It could be coming from part of you that is 3 years old, something you experienced when you were 4 or 5 or 6, and has been buried there from that age until however old you are now, that many years. That's why these projections, this fixation that we have when we have a crush, can be so strong and so uncomfortable. I have noticed in my work that a lot of the time, a crush will actually be a projection that we create based on the perception that we have of our parents. That means, however we perceived a parent when we were young, and whatever we felt we did not receive from them, we can take that shit and project it onto somebody outside of us, feeling like maybe they could give us what I didn't receive from that parent. Usually this is all subconscious. We're not doing this consciously. If we were, it would make things probably a little bit easier, but this is all happening very deep in the psyche. I'll give you an example. If one of your parents was very withdrawn, emotionally detached, quiet, maybe not showing much interest in you, or at least that's how you perceived them, you might form a fixation or a crush on somebody who you perceive to be that way, thinking subconsciously that if they were to give you what you wanted from that parent, they could solve your problems. You would be healed. You would finally get that thing that you so desperately wanted from that parent. Now, here's an extra layer that is quite ironic. Ideally, when we go out and find a long-term partner, we are going to find somebody who, yes, they will resemble our parents in certain ways, but they will also counter some of the things that we experienced in our childhood that made us feel unsafe, whether it was not feeling seen, not feeling important, not feeling thought of. Ideally, we're going to pair up with somebody who does help us to feel seen, who does think of us and who we feel important to. And that will create this layer of safety that might be new for us. Maybe we've never felt safe like this before. And I think I should do a whole episode on feeling safe in a relationship when you've never felt that before. It can be jarring and almost confusing if you've never experienced safety and then you suddenly do. So going back to, we find this partner, we finally feel emotionally safe, we feel supported, and yet there is still this part of us from our childhood that does not feel that way. And this part of us still wants to be healed. Yes, your partner can help you to address a lot of that, but they can't help you address all of it. You're going to still have some remnants of these things from your childhood, and having a crush on someone else is one way that those remnants can come forward. It's a very uncomfortable way. It's not fun. It's not usually lacking in shame. It can be a shameful experience. It doesn't have to be, but it can be. Another part of this that I find very interesting is that the way that we work through our shit in life is that we are served situations that are triggering, and we get to choose how we're going to move through it now that we are adults. So a triggering situation happens, we're faced with the uncomfortable emotions, and then we get to work through it. Well, if your partner helps you to feel safe for the most part and emotionally supported, they are probably not going to trigger that part of you. You know who is going to trigger that part of you? The crush that you have formed based on the perception of them, which is based on the perception of one of your parents. That's who's going to trigger that within you. You could say that a crush is kind of like a mirror. In fact, it is a mirror. A crush isn't based on who that person actually is, what they actually are, what their characteristics are. It's based on your perception of them, your fantasy. It is a mirror which you can look in and decide, do I want to work on this childhood wound? Do I want to work on the wound of not feeling good enough, not feeling seen or special, like a star, like I was cool, like I could be accepted for who I am? Do I want to work on that? That's what a crush is going to reflect back to you. And it's your choice to take the invitation into it or not. You can continue to ignore. That's not usually going to resolve the issue that your crush is based on. What can we do to actually move through this crush? I will give you my opinion based on working with clients and my own stuff coming up on how we can move through this. And we absolutely can. Just because you developed a crush doesn't mean your relationship is over. Doesn't mean that you're a horrible person and you should give up on being in love. No. So we're going to actually go through right now how you can move through it. And with any of these things, I do recommend that you potentially work with someone like a coach or a therapist to help guide you through the process, as it can get sort of messy. It can be confusing when you're trying to work through your own stuff. We're in the shitstorm. And so somebody who is not in it, they can hold our hand and help us to go through the journey. It's very supportive. The first thing that I would recommend if you have formed a crush is to sit with this idea of the crush like you would in a meditation. So can you actually sit down, literally sit down, and bring into your mind, into your brain, the perception of this person? And then ask yourself, what do you notice about this person? What is the fantasy that you have created about this person? Are they very strong? Is there a particular way that they carry themselves? Is there something that some characteristic about them that stands out to you? How do you perceive them to be? Not how are they actually, because we can never really know that if we're practicing the self-restraint that I recommended earlier. We can never really know who this person really is. So how do you perceive them to be? And I would suggest being very clear with yourself. This is a perception. This is a creation of your own mind. This is not who the person actually is. I would say most of the time, if we were to meet our crush and to speak to them and to know them, they they won't be anything like the fantasy that we created. How could they be? How could they align to a T with the projection that we have created? They can't. They cannot do that. Nobody can do that. Once you have sat with what is the projection, what is the fantasy, how do you perceive this person, I would say to ask yourself, how does that perception relate back to how you perceived a parent? Or it could even be a previous boyfriend or girlfriend, a romantic relationship that you had. Although I do believe that it usually goes back to a parent or a caregiver. So that would be the next question. How does that perception that I have created go back to how I perceived one of my parents? I also would say that if you are straight, if you are a straight woman, usually that crush is going to be based on your relationship and your perception of your father, and then vice versa for straight couples. I don't know about gay couples. I would imagine it could be similar, where if you are a gay man, perhaps it goes back to your perception of your father. I don't know. I can speak to straight couples, though. So if you are a straight woman, a lot of the time, your perception of men is going to relate back to your perception of your relationship with your father. The next question would be, what is your perception of what this person could give you that you are not receiving or experiencing in your life? In your life or your relationship. That doesn't mean that your partner isn't giving it to you or that it's their fault and we need to blame your partner for being bad and all of that nonsense. It's simply, what am I not experiencing in my life now, in my relationship now, that I am wanting this person to give to me, that I'm wanting to experience with this outside person? This is a really cool part because you can then take what you have learned from this question and start to apply it into your relationship. So if you are wanting more sexual excitement, if you are wanting to be seen more, if you are wanting to be feeling more special, how can you build in those feelings into your current relationship? What kind of conversation can you have with your partner, or maybe even with yourself? How can you show up in a way that speaks to what you are trying to receive from this outside person? I think it's really important not to just blame our partner for not giving us that when there's a chance that we aren't even giving them the opportunity to give us that experience or for us to experience that together. Those are things that need to be communicated. Nobody can read our mind. So I would avoid the blame game of, well, he is not making me feel special. Okay, what makes you feel special? What makes you feel seen? How can you show up that way? How can you start the conversation in order to get those needs met? You are in charge and responsible for your own needs. And that's why I love this question, because it allows us to unveil and to actually get the ball rolling in our own relationship around things that we are wanting to experience. Unmet needs. I have heard, and I find this very interesting, that when we have a crush or a fixation on someone, this idea that we are wanting to maybe seduce somebody, not that we are actually seducing them or that we are going out of our way to lure them in, but just that idea of, oh, I want this thing from this person. What we are actually wanting is to see ourselves that way. So if we are wanting this crush to see us as a star, we want to see ourselves as a star. I want to seduce myself. How do you want to see yourself that you have tricked yourself into believing you want this crush to see you? Or the world as a whole? How do you want the world to see you? That will always come back to, how do you want to see yourself? If you want your crush to see you as the coolest person in the world, how can you see yourself as the coolest person in the world? I love these questions because they help us to break down some of the shame that can come up with a crush when we have no freaking idea what's going on. When we have shame circling this crush, it just deepens the attachment, it deepens the emotions, and it can be even harder to let it go and to move through it when we are so crushed by the shame. Also, asking these questions can help us to know the origin of why we feel the way we do. It's not that we're broken. It's not that we're not in love with our partner anymore. It's not that there's something wrong with us. We can actually go back to the origin and say, this is why I have this crush, because I didn't feel that I received this thing from a parent. And now I am wanting to receive that from an outside person who I am perceiving to be like my father, like my mother. So knowing the origin helps us to bring in a little bit of compassion for ourselves. Like, oh, this is why. It's not because I'm crazy. It's not because I'm broken. It gives us room to actually work on this stuff, to be with it without all of the shame and discomfort. Being with it is what helps us to move through it. I also want to add that when we have a crush, we are not defined by having that crush. A crush is simply something that we are experiencing. We have a lot of experiences as human beings, and this happens to be one of them. It's not our entire being. It's simply a part of us. That's what I like to say, a part of us that is wanting to receive or experience something with this outside person. Here is a challenge for you. How open and vulnerable can you be with your partner that you have developed these feelings? Now, everything that I've talked about up until now might help you in this conversation. A crush is not about the outside person. It's about you. It's about what you have experienced in your life and what you are being invited into working through. So how can you bring that fact into the conversation to build in a little bit of cushioning? It's definitely not the easiest conversation to have, although you would be surprised. Some clients that I have talked to as a couple, I've sat the three of us and we have talked about crushes that have been developed, and you would be surprised how well the other partner will take it, especially in the case of being in a session with a professional who can help to navigate the situation with a little bit sensitivity and understanding for what's going on. You would be surprised how much of a relief it can be to get these feelings that we're having out in the open and to let our partner know too where it comes from so that they know that you're not just fawning over some outside person because they're so great and they're so wonderful and they're better than your partner. That is not usually the case. We can show them that, hey, I have these feelings. I'm going through something that's difficult. I am being triggered by this. And I think it comes back to this experience that I had with my mother or my father. You know what they say, that secrets die in the light. Before having that conversation, I would recommend doing the internal reflection and the questions that I mentioned earlier. I would recommend doing that first so that you do have some kind of understanding of what's going on before you start bringing it to your partner. Maybe organizing your thoughts a little bit so that you can have a constructive and effective conversation with them that isn't as overtaken by emotion or confusion. Having a sense of where your own stuff comes from before you end up bringing it into the conversation. And when you bring it up, I would say getting a gauge on how secure your partner is or how secure your relationship is would be important. Is your partner particularly sensitive? Is your partner maybe a little bit more tough, a little more thick-skinned? That would affect how you're going to bring it up. How delicately are you going to have to word this situation with them? In what situation and what circumstances are you going to bring up this topic? You definitely want to make sure that your partner feels respected and loved. And so what can you say? Well, how can you convey your love for them? That's the whole point of this episode, is that you love your partner. And so if this is going to be difficult for them to hear, if they're going to feel any amount of jealousy, could be normal, could be totally understandable. And if they're going to feel hurt, if they feel maybe a little angry, that would be okay, I think. Can they have room for their feelings too if we're making room for yours? They might need to do their own processing. Some couples don't need that. I've seen a person hear about a crush from their partner and kind of just laugh it off. And so I don't want to put that on you. You're going to have to gauge how this is going to be received by your partner. Ultimately, what this is about is not rubbing something in your partner's face or making them feel bad and telling them, well, this is your fault, and blaming them because something is missing. This is about being open and honest with your partner. Honesty isn't always pretty. Honesty requires us to say the things that are difficult. That's the point of honesty. If honesty was just about saying the easy shit, then everybody would be doing it. But I will tell you right now, a lot of people aren't. They're keeping their shit inside. Well, how can we convey it to our partner so that we feel some relief, so that they see this part of us that's very vulnerable? It's not fun to have a crush. I will tell you that from what I have seen with my couples. It's not fun to carry that with you. So how can we bring in some honesty and some vulnerability and actually talk about this? It's not the end of the relationship. Nobody has cheated. Nobody has had an affair, although some couples work through affairs too. So that's a whole other topic. But bringing that shame up into the open so that it can eventually be diminished and we can therefore move through the crush and come out on the other end. When in doubt, turn to a coach or a therapist. We work with this stuff all the time. We are not fazed by somebody having a crush. We work with people who have experienced infidelity, okay? So that's a whole other level. If you have a crush and you want to work through it, you genuinely are willing to do the work and the self-reflection, that could be difficult. Could be difficult to have this conversation with yourself. I would say work with a coach or a therapist. We are here for you. We want to help you feel okay and to not carry around the shame and the burden of experiencing these feelings that are quite human. That is it for today's episode. I really enjoyed talking about this topic. I think it's a shame that when you mention this on social media, people get really up in arms about how it's just so wrong and you failed. I've actually seen this, on TikTok. You're a failure if you have a crush. And I just don't agree with that. That is not my prerogative. And so I hope that this episode gave you a little bit of perspective on why you might be feeling the way you do. And I hope that you can take this information and create a little bit more compassion for yourself. I assume that you love your partner and that you are in a good relationship, and that should not have to come to an end or be blocked by this feeling of having a crush when it's just a feeling. It's not something that you have done. It's not something that you have acted on. It's a feeling. And we can always work through feelings. There's always a solution and a way that we can get through that, especially as a couple. That can be so connecting. We can talk about these things and end up feeling even closer with our partner, which I think is so, so very special. If you enjoyed today's episode, I encourage you to go ahead and give me a rating if you're on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. And if you're on YouTube, if you could like this video and subscribe, that would be so supportive to the channel. If you would like to work with me as a coach, please do reach out to me on Instagram or TikTok. I am at Coached by Kelby. You can also reach out to me on email. I am coachedbykelby@gmail.com. You could also send me questions if you'd like me to answer a question you might have about your relationship, something difficult that you're trying to work through. Thank you so much for listening, and I look forward to seeing you all again next Friday.